would like to capitalize our drive forward in terms of being the regional hub for space industries. We would like to focus specifically into the access to space, whereby the current conversation that we are having with multiple launch vehicle operators is to host their launch operation commercially under the spirit of COPOS in Malaysia.
Hello, SpaceWatchers. I'm Rika, the social media head and part-time editor of SpaceWatch.Global. And this is a new episode of Space Café Radio, a radio channel dedicated to emerging trends and live conferences in the space sector. Today, we are taking you to Langkawi, Malaysia for LISF 2023, which is the very first global space conference launched the Malaysian space sector, organized at LIMA in Langkawi. Today's guest is Muhamad Nurazmi Abbas, who is the CEO of Guarding Group. And he's here to talk to us about the unveiling of the space exploration document as well as the future of space in Malaysia. This radio is part of a collaboration of SpaceWatch.Global and Duet.Global. The collaboration focuses on creating a wide audience for the emerging Malaysian space economy and highlighting the commitment of creating an Asian space economy. We hope you enjoy your listen. Hi, everybody, and welcome to SpaceWatch.Global's radio, straight from Langkawi, Malaysia. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Muhamad Nurazmi Abbas, who is popularly called Azmi.
Thank you so much, Rika, for the introductions. And thank you so much for taking all the efforts to fly down over to Langkawi. So it's a big crowd over here. This is the first time that LIMA had been reorganized after 4 years of hiatus. Normally, LIMA is a biannual event. And this year, why it is so special? Because it is the first time in the history of 30 years organizing LIMA for the country that we have a specific and dedicated space element out of it. I'll give into more detail in that. A little bit of introduction of myself. My daily job, I'm the CEO for the Guarding Group. We are primarily a defense contractor. Also, we build our own ships. We build fast intercepting craft all by ourselves, design and build in-house. We also is the primary service provider for MRO for 9 type ratings of helicopters that all serve the government of Malaysia. We also have some associate and subsidiary companies into the area of systems integrations, cybersecurities, and one of our flagship projects includes a development of high technology aerospace dedicated municipalities in which in this 11,000 acres of land facing the east coast of Malaysia, we built an airport, a dual purpose airport operating a standard aviation, commercial and logistic option, while at the same time also aspired to serve space operations, especially for suborbital operators, as well as air launch operators in the future. So while my second hat, as a daily job, I'm also the CEO of Duet.Global, Berhad, the main organizer for Langkawi International Space Forum and Space Technology Nexus, an exclusive event for LIMA 2023 this year, under the purview of the Malaysian Space Agency and the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. The third hat that I'm wearing for LIMA this year is also I'm the secretary for the recently established and announced by our Honorable Prime Minister yesterday, the Malaysian Space Industry Corporations. I'm the secretary of this particular entity. The aspiration of this particular entity is to foster collaborations, cooperation, and strengthen the capability of Malaysia as one of the up-and-coming spacefaring countries, regionally and globally.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I'm so excited you spoke about the blueprint Honorable Prime Minister announced yesterday and the Space Forum, which was inaugurated by the Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah. 2030 blueprint is exciting. It's ambitious. One of the things that's very interesting about it is you're getting into all these technologies that have existed, but you're doing it from scratch. What do you think will be the visionary difference, the purpose for this particular policy that will be a game changer for Malaysia? Because these technologies exist.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Rika. That's a very hard question that you're posting to me there. And when it comes to space industry, it's one of the hardest industry in the world, even though it's the second fastest growing industry in the world, but it's also the hardest. Before I answer directly to your question, Rika, probably a little bit of insight what the government actually launched yesterday. The first is that we launched earlier afternoon yesterday is the Malaysia Space Exploration Blueprint. Like you said, the aim is by 2030 the industry contributes to 1% of the GDP of the country. That equates to somewhere around Malaysian ringgit 10 billion and creating at least 5,000 to 7,000 jobs. Subsequently, in the afternoon, by the Deputy Prime Minister too, there is also the Chair of National Science Council of the country. We launched the Space Industry Strategic Plan, whereby its first initiatives is establishment of the Malaysia Space Industry Corporations. So basically, all of these elements and equation is to support the act that we passed in the parliamentary bill early last year, the Space Act, RUU 834, to charter and drive the industry forward. Now, based on what being presented within the blueprint, to summarize the whole intention, as you rightfully said, Rika, most of the intention and highlight within that particular blueprints, the price of available technology, but we must also first measure where we are now. We have all the basic building blocks of aviation and aerospace. We have a basic building. We are very strong in E&Es. We are very strategically located. I think this is the most important parameters. We are very strategically located in ASEAN, quite close to the equator. When you talk about access to space, we are also very much neutral. And when you talk about ASEAN, we have 9 or 10 countries within ASEAN. We have 1.1 trillion people. We have 600 million people with a trade of 1.1 trillion USD, but almost literally no real space industry or activities within this region, just up and coming between the countries. So capitalizing our fairly matured and strong positionings from a policy, socio-economy, and global presence, as well as our geographical locations, we would like to capitalize our drive forward in terms of being the regional hub for space industries. We would like to focus specifically into the access to space, whereby the current conversation that we are having with multiple launch vehicle operators is to host their launch operation commercially under the spirit of COPWAS in Malaysia. Whilst being a fairly strategic country, we also understand strategically that even though we are strategically geographically located, we also understand certain limitations in which our focus is only on air launch and sea launch. Because ground launch is going to be somewhat of a challenge to us because we have fairly small land masses. Geographically, we are comprised of 2 areas. One is in the peninsula, the other one is in the Bornean Islands. So the peninsula is entirely a no-go for you to do a ground launch based on technical studies and data. You can't do launch without upsetting certain stakeholders. Whilst if you are doing it in the Bornean Island, there are chances. We have evaluated a few possible locations, but the challenge is logistics and infrastructure. So as we speak, we don't see potentials or possibilities to do ground launch within Malaysia, putting it that way, because ground launch will be more focused for geostationary, but we focus more on air launch and sea launch. The analogy is quite simple. There's a lot of talks with global industry player. And within our blueprint, we highlighted the intention of building our own satellites, have sovereignty on the industry. But let's say we have Boeing or Airbus or some other or Turkish aerospace industry establishing its manufacturing of satellites here or payloads here. But if they don't have access to space within where they establish their investment to build the satellites and its ecosystem, it defeats the whole purpose. So thus, access to space important. And to me, I believe it's a key economic driver. While at the same time, I understand the complexity, not at the technical side, rather than administrative and geopolitical issues. It involves MTCRs, it involves bilateral negotiations, and all sorts of issues. Myself, I've been talking to various countries. For example, I've been talking to China, I've been talking to the Russians, I've been talking to the Scottish side, to the UK side, even to the Ukrainian side. They are all very much, even the Japanese, I must mention this, on the potentials of hosting their launch. So where we see we could contribute is that we would like to host the launch as far as the launch is purely commercial under the spirit on the cooperation on the peaceful use of outer space. So we would like to, what we call it, centralize ourselves around that, pull investment and build the industry. 1,000 acres of land had been allocated as a Malaysia Space City. That is also part of the initiative within the Malaysia Space Exploration Blueprint this particular piece of land is facing the east coast or the South China Sea that provides a strategic positioning to build the industry from there.
It's great that you brought up investment.
Yep.
That was going to be my next question. As we've seen emerging space countries come up, one of the space countries in the region is actually Australia, the APAC region. They just started in 2017, except Australia has kind of gone the way where the government has actually come in and put enough investment to leapfrog them into a space now where they're also at the same table of legacy space players. How do you think the government in Malaysia is going to come up and support this endeavor? What kind of fiscal investment are they going to make? And in terms of 5,000 job creation, but who are we creating these jobs for? How are those technical skills going to come ahead? What is the role of your Malaysian government here?
If you compare Australia versus Malaysia, I think a part of the government really have the real political will, putting investment, etc., pretty much driving it. Part of it, we also is aware that Australia have a lot of, what we call it, support from the NASA program and also the UKSA bridging program as well. That drives the political will of the country. Whilst Malaysia, at this moment, there is a political will, does the policies and the frameworks and the act and everything. But we are still today at this stage in negotiation within Langkawi International Space Forum. We have a dedicated session that we do bilateral talks. We just started. So we have been talking to the multiple countries. We have been talking to all the key space players now within the forum. I will be continuing to do so in the next few months going forward as a start, because to have the government to put fundings and real serious positioning, fiscal investment, and to pull bilateral investment requires talks with bilateral parties as well. So we have more or less geared up ourselves. We have done the housekeeping for the country. So now it's time to talk to the other parties. We are more or less a little bit lagging behind because there's a lot. The challenge to us, Malaysia, quite frankly, this is going to be a little bit political, is that there's so many changes of political leaders between the period of 4 or 5 years prior to 2023. Plus, COVID-19 hits badly on 2019, impacting the whole economy of the country. So we just recently have a democratically elected leader. I believe this government is much more stable. And that's why we are trying to push our agenda here and to drive it forward. The first fiscal investment, not in the form of monetary, is the asset that I mentioned to you just now. So it's being gazetted. We do a letter of intent exchange between Gading itself and the Malaysian Space Agency on the intention of building the Malaysian Space Agency, effectively emphasizing that Gading is investing into tangible asset to build the space industry. The model is that we give this piece of land respectively to potential foreign investor that wanted to establish their industry in Malaysia. We give the land as equity value, set up the JV, we assist everything and anything that needs to be from the investment perspective, regulatory perspective, and administrative perspective. While at the same time, we match them with local supply chain vendor to build the industry. So when you ask me about who we are building this, what we call it, a job creation, we are focusing on startups. At least there are 63 startups within Malaysia, within downstream and upstream in space. But amongst the 63, there are around 10 to 15 that is pretty much focused smack dab in the industry itself. I can name a few, for example, Space in Sdn Bhd, they are building small launch satellite. We have Azmi Technology Industries that build capsule and in the process of building DNLV, dedicated nano launch vehicle. We have another company called Angkasa X, another startup as well, that will be launching their first satellite, I believe it's a low orbit satellite to be launched somewhere third week of June. But what needs to be done now with all these key ingredients around is to merge everything together, massage it, putting it in the right perspective and push it to the global market and say that we are ready to go in. So at least as a start, we can capitalize the ASEAN market and subsequently into APAC and global.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Moving is right up there with death and divorce in the Stress Olympics. But fear not. Turn that box of woes into a crate of woes with moving tips in the Life Beyond Boxes podcast with Premium Q Moving. Dive into the world of hassle-free moves, learn tips and tricks to save on cash and your sanity. Say goodbye to those moving meltdowns and hello to the smooth sailings. Or should we say smooth movings? Tune into Life Beyond Boxes with Premium Q Moving on lifebeyondboxes.com or find us on your favorite podcast platform. And with us, unpack the secrets to a stress-free move.
It's very interesting that this is the strategy, because there's other countries like Singapore and Philippines who've been doing something very similar.
Yeah.
However, Korea has not been doing something that's on the same lines. Commercial entities completely. Like today we see iSpace coming out with
of
huge
course.
lunar economy plan. Do you think Malaysia will be investing? I don't mean financially or whatever, but I mean in terms of like long-term vision. Do you think they will be getting into these bigger missions of a lunar economy, of a Mars mission? I know you mentioned interplanetary yesterday, which is why I'm asking this. But what is the ambitious goal starting this industry now, especially post-COVID, where we realize that, maybe our wants are different from our necessities. And in some ways, for emerging countries, space is a luxury.
Yep.
We don't really have those $1 billion budgets that the West has. But, what is the most ambitious goal in this entire vision?
To answer to you quite straightforwardly, we now focus more on necessity rather than wants.
Okay.
We wanted to first establish the basic building blocks of the space industry, more in the role of supporting the other major space players, capitalizing our positionings, our geopolitics and socio-economy within Malaysia, and our, readily available manpower that is, I wouldn't say cheap, that is fairly reasonable. So we would rather position ourselves there. Some of us, even myself, we do have bigger visions for lunar economies. We understand the perspective and potential of it. It's just that for the time being, the country is not ready for that particular activities as yet. However, having said that, we are more than happy to support any other major countries or major industries that have interest. For example, you were mentioning iSpace. Let's say iSpace would like to have a base or a launch operation that is close to equator, that reduces their risk and their costs of launch. We are more than happy to receive them, facilitate and host. By doing so, we can learn and slowly jumpstart ourselves into the bigger or a broader perspective of space, as you rightfully said.
We've been speaking about Asian corporation today. The entire day we've been speaking about this. And everybody, on the panel was also talking about the way to go ahead. But, our geopolitics in this region are so layered. They're so complicated because there's history there. There's a lot of cultural differences. There's a lot of civilization differences. Because now we're going to have Southeast Asia. We're going to have South Asia as well. We're going to have Middle Asia. And I know Turkey has also been coming into the Asian economy very recently. And then you have other players. China has been extremely territorial. Even with their press releases, we barely get to hear things. Where do you think this cooperation is going to start? Who will initiate this cooperation? And the most important is who's going to sustain these corporations in the region?
Indeed, it's a very tricky and delicate situation. I was just on the panel just now discussing exactly this particular situation, balancing between regional and commercial interests. And space is always dual use, whatever said and done. Definitely there is a need. And there is a lot of talks, but just remain as rhetorical talks about establishing of ASEAN cooperation. Some would say the cooperation should mirror like what ASA is doing, but we don't have the framework and the value chain like how the European have. We don't have the heritage. That is the first challenge. The second challenge, as I fully say, is the issues of geopolitical. First, within ASEAN, and secondly, externally from ASEAN with the respective strategic interests of various countries. As you rightfully say, you can see even in Lima, you see the Russians here really pushing their interests strategically, if I may say, and commercially. We entertain only commercial requests when it comes to space. We have China, literally half year of 2023 in and out. Even some of them keeps on coming and talk to me, in which I gave a very specific response to them. We don't mind working with anybody. We are a neutral country. So as long as this cooperation in whatsoever manner is of peaceful use of outer space. That's our key, requirements and deal breakers. Having said that, a part of these respective superpowers that I just, highlight, there is also the coalitions, the federations, a part of, IAC. IAF is a fairly neutral federations, but it's very big. It's the largest space-based or astronautical-based federations. But there are also coalition like APSCO, APR South, and a few others that have respective interests within the region as well. So it's very tricky, and it is of high time that ASEAN itself, within the 9 or 10 countries, to have its own cooperations. Thus, while we are having the head of space agency meetings amongst the ASEAN space agency leaders within LIMA itself, to be a precursor to a bigger conversation that hopefully can happen on the first quarter next year. If God's will, next year on the first quarter, we'll be organizing, is subsequent to what happens here in Lima, we'll be organizing the ASEAN Southeast Asian Chapter International Space Forum by IAF within this region. It was originally planned during Lima, but then was shifted out over to the first quarter next year. This is where I think the key focus of the conversation will revolve around ASEAN, I don't know, probably ASEAN Space Agency or something, but knowing ASEAN, being an ASEAN, but in Malaysia itself, in comparison to the Europeans, the challenge and the trickiness would be the pool funding or the cylindrical funding amongst the countries. Like we see how ESA did this amongst the 22 countries, is that each countries, member countries within ESA, contribute significant portion of funds. You always see Italians and the French, and now the German throwing money into that. So challenging who's bigger this year, who's bigger next year. And in the context of ASEAN, let me give an example. Singapore have all the money. When I was in GSTC back in February, I saw that at least 150 million USD have been allocated for fundamental research in space. While in Malaysia, we don't have that specific policy on funding as yet. But our advantage is we have other assets. We have more, what we call it, organized policy, so to say. Now it's a matter of having more bilateral conversation in terms of funding. Now, if you look at Indonesia, they will see that they are the big brother in ASEAN, putting it away, because of the population that they hold and the larger land masses of their position. To me, the strategy is that we need to identify the strength and the vision of each country within ASEAN. What would be Indonesia's role? What would be Singapore's role? I've been talking to the Singaporean side for close to a couple of years now. So we almost come to a certain positioning commercially that we may be providing hosting or launch for the Singaporeans, because we know Singapore putting a strategic positioning to some of their launch companies. So I think this could be a good model of cooperations. So while Singapore keeps the IPs and technologies within their boundaries, and we keep our sovereignty by hosting the launch again, so as long as the payload is within the peaceful user space. We have been talking to the Thailand side as well with GISDA on these possibilities, and recently I spoke with Nadi in Brunei. So we are exploring. Malaysia is not championing. We are facilitating and coordinating the talks, in which at the end of the day, during ISF next year, we hope we can come up to a resolution and really push this agenda forward.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to see what Malaysia will do in the next couple of years. And I really hope that all of these themes and ambitions come true. Thank you for sitting down with me today.
Sure thing, Rika. Thank you so much. Anytime. Thank you so much for coming as well.
If you want to keep up with the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global. Subscribe to our newsletters, and of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Rika Valduri, the social media head and part-time editor in SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space. See you next time.